Welcome to the 19-9 podcast. Tonight we've got Nathan Grubel. What's going on, Nate?
Nothing much, man. I'm excited to definitely be on with you guys. My first guest appearance of the 2022 NBA draft cycle. So we're starting early. We're right before October, though, so this is about right. We got to kick it off, right?
That's right. I love it. I mean, the training camps open tomorrow, and NBA training camps, and we're like a month away from some college hoop stuff.
Yeah, not too far off. I think November 9th would be the opening of the season. That would be the Champions Classic, and I'm sure we're going to get into some of those guys that are going to be involved in those games. So not far off 100%. At all.
Oh, yeah. All right, give us your basketball origin story. How did you fall in love with the game? One of the things we really get into is just the basketball community and how it's so tied in and how the people that get into it become so passionate and intertwined.
Sure. So I really started following basketball heavily at the beginning of high school, and as I fell more in love with the game kind of like later in high school, I started taking journalism classes, and I thought it'd be really cool to get in the media and kind of be like a basketball writer, right? That was my original passion, so I went to Temple as a journalism major, and funny enough, the more and more I got into it, I kind of wanted to be in the game itself, right? I fell in love with watching the young players, the whole aspect of scouting. That's really where I wanted to be. And so once I got out of college, I started pursuing different opportunities, making connections, networking with people in front offices, did pro scout school, interned, and then worked for a private scouting firm that was known at the time as EV Hoops, run by now Los Angeles Lakers scout Alon Vinokurov. So I got really good experience background there. And as you guys are well aware, any career in sports is very hard to break into, right, at any level. So I've been working a corporate level job since then, but I kind of had a little bit of a idea on the side through all of the quarantine and COVID and all that. Like, that was the perfect opportunity for me to start my own platform, get back into it, and offer up a lot of my thoughts, a lot of my insights, observations into not necessarily just talking about the prospects themselves and my evaluations, but kind of giving the general public more of a discourse that they would expect to hear behind the scenes. What do scouts actually look for? How do they actually evaluate prospects? What matters and what goes on behind the scenes in front offices? So that's really why I started my own platform, Draft Deeper. I thought that it was definitely a concept that could take off and be really good in podcast form. And obviously I'll look to do even more things in the public spaces for the 2022 draft. But I've had great success. My first full draft cycle with the podcast, I couldn't be happier with some of the relationships I've already made, some of the appearances I've made elsewhere. So that's really my story up to this point. But definitely I'm a lot happier to be in the public space again, doing more of the media stuff and kind of combining the best of both worlds versus just be pursuing one path or the other.
So you said you went to a pro scout. What was it, class or?
So Pro Scout School. Yeah, Pro Scout School is an event run by TPG Sports Group. It's done out in Las Vegas, basically the same time as Summer League every year. And essentially what they do is it's run by Pete Philo, who was a former NBA scout himself, has worked in the sports industry for many, many years. But he brings in all sorts of experts from front offices, from media who are very close to front offices, and it's really it's a class per se. They do different sorts of like breakout sessions and interview sessions with all of these executives and personnel that they bring in, but it's also really a chance to network as well. That's how you really meet people. Just making those kind of connections in a space like Las Vegas with the Summer League where everything's wide open, you can literally bump into and run into anybody. That's the perfect opportunity and place to do something like that. So it's educational, but it's also about networking and continuing to further your connection space.
Okay, you mentioned connections and a couple of the people you had on your podcast. I recognize one of them, but you also got to go on a draft legend Chad Ford's podcast. So before we get any further into just talking with you, what was it like talking to Chad? Because I'm sure you, like me, have been reading him since the early aughts, and I was like printing out his draft guide back in the day and highlighting things, getting really nerdy with it. So how fun was that?
Yeah, ironically, I mean, I met Chad for the first time out at Pro Scout School in Las Vegas. He was the very first year that I did it. He was a speaker on one of the panels, and I got to bump into him before one of the sessions to kind of introduce myself. And being on his show, being asked to be on his show, some of the support that he's shown, as well as Coach David Thorpe over at True Hoop. He's also worked at ESPN for a number of years. Guys like that, it's an honor because they don't have to take times out of their day to support anybody like me just starting up. They don't have to do things like that, but the people who do, the people who show initiative and reach out and offer their support, their advice, and then a spot on their platform to guest star. I mean, I was blown away. I was excited when it first happened, and being able to do the podcast, it was awesome. There's no other word to use for it. It was awesome.
Yeah, the only thing you missed was like some Hawaiian birds in the background interrupting you guys.
Yeah, right. I didn't have the he sometimes has the rooster pop on during his podcast. Exactly. I didn't get the rooster, but
yeah.
That'd be pretty amazing, though.
Yeah.
I mean, the fact that you went as far as you have already, it's pretty amazing. You know, meet these kind of people. Like, I wouldn't know what to do if I met somebody like that famous,
Yeah.
and to talk basketball with him, that would be amazing.
I think it's a lot of it's just being open on your platform. I'm willing to interact with, engage with quite literally anybody who wants to tweet at me or message me, etc. So being that open and kind of being that honest and just wanting to do good in the community, wanting to not only get better at it but help make others better at evaluating and appreciating the game, that's exactly how those doors are open. So I'm honored. I'm glad to be on with you guys today too. You both seem like you guys are about doing the same thing. So that's really how this all spreads. That's how this all happens. That's how we all grow and get better together.
100%. All right, give us kind of your basics. So, do you when you're watching games now, are you breaking guys down every time, or can you turn it off? And then, what's your process? Because I definitely feel like the longer I've watched basketball, the more I'm able to pick up on some of the nuance that I just didn't see when I was younger. But I'm just kind of, I want to hear what your take is on that deeper level.
So when I'm watching college basketball games now, it's a little hard for me to turn off the evaluator side. I can tell you that it's a lot easier watching NBA games than just being a fan. I can definitely do that. I don't always have to heavily analyze and critique, and I'm usually not taking notes the majority of the time I'm watching NBA games unless I'm watching them for a specific purpose, like I'm doing a study on like a rookie or a sophomore player, etc. But when I'm watching college games, I immediately want to take notes. I want to watch a little bit deeper. I want to definitely critique and evaluate certain players that I'm watching the game for. I'm usually not just throwing on a college game just to watch it, right? If I was going, not that I'm not a fan of college basketball, obviously I am, otherwise I couldn't be able to do any of this. I would want to gouge my eyes out. But usually if I'm watching a game just to watch a game, it's generally more of an NBA game. But when I'm doing as far as like my evaluation process, I think the only way that you can scout at a high level is to not only cover and watch enough of the sport that you're scouting, but also the league that these guys are going into, right? Like, I don't know how I could scout and evaluate without also having a pristine understanding of what's going on at the NBA level and how those guys are ultimately going to translate. So the toughest thing for me is finding a balance between watching both leagues during the year, paying attention to Division I, or whether it's maybe I'm scouting an international player, I have to pay attention to one of those leagues, or now we have the G League Ignite, we have Overtime Elite. There's so much now, so it's balancing 3 or 4 different things along with keeping up with what's going on in the NBA, who's winning, why are they winning, what's working. So it's finding a balance, but when I'm able to find that balance, that's how I'm able to succeed in scouting and evaluating the younger guys, because it's all about finding at least 1 to 2 translatable skills that these guys have, where they can step on an NBA floor and you know that they're going to be able to contribute in those areas right away. That's how they're going to earn minutes. The only way you get better at basketball, let alone NBA basketball, is getting on the floor and actually playing it with guys who are on your level or above your level. So if these guys are going to get better, they need to be able to step on an NBA floor and contribute to keep earning minutes to build out the rest of their foundation. So that's really at the core of my draft philosophy, is finding those few things that work, and how are they able to contribute to an NBA team and bring success right away? Can they fit in a locker room? And then you worry about a lot of the other stuff later as they're in year 2, 3, 4, 5, etc.
Yeah, you mentioned all of the the different platforms. I'm always amazed every year at the draft. Fran Fraschilla or the overseas guys parachutes in and just name drops guys that no one's ever heard of. It's a little easier now, but man, there's a lot to keep up on, and just comparing cross platforms or trying to get a gauge for the competition level in those different areas is like part of the game, part of it too.
So my question is how many of the G League games do you watch then? Like, I mean, it's pretty important to your draft, right? So, like, you said the NBA in college, but, like, you got to watch, like you said, all these other platforms too. How do you find time to watch all these games?
Well, so the G League Ignite season last year was really interesting. I was able to actually catch quite a few games when they were in the bubble. And the good news about last year, because they were in the bubble, it was that quote-unquote like shortened, compact type of season. I mean, that was able to be done efficiently, but when you have more of a spread out year, and then you're trying to keep up with some of the overseas leagues as well that play at different times of the year, and you're trying to balance that with all the college games. The good news about the G League bubble, like I said, besides it being compact, the schedule, those games are also played usually between like 1 to 3 in the afternoon Eastern time where I'm at, and then like a lot of college games that happen, usually they're at night. It's like 7 to 11 Eastern time, or maybe past that if I need to stay up and watch like a Pac-12 game or something like that. So that aspect was a lot easier to balance, but as you just said, there's a lot of different things going on, and now the G League's going to be playing a little bit more of a normalized schedule, so there's going to be games going on at the same time. So it's really about me doing the preparation that I need to over these next 2 to 3 weeks, hammering out my schedule database, literally making myself a schedule from now all the way through till like April, with what I'm going to be watching and when, because if I don't do that, it's going to get completely jumbled, and I need to be able to watch all of these guys a certain amount of times to get a feel for their games, at least show them the amount of respect to get to understand their games. Like all these guys, if you're really going to evaluate somebody, you need to see them at least like 4 to 5 times. That's usually the number that I try to hit throughout the season. And when I'm looking at my prospect database now, I still need to do a second and a third run through a lot of the different rosters, but I'm already at like 184 guys in the database. So it's like, holy hell, how am I going to be able to do that, right? So it really is. It's preparation before the season. I could not emphasize that enough. It's why when I was at the private scouting firm that I worked for, I mean, we literally took like a month to 2 months in advance to lay out all of this and make sure that we all had our own schedules. Who are we going to be watching when? That's why you do that, or else you can't keep up.
Scheduling database, he said. That's the key word. There's got to be some color coding in there too.
There's always color coding. Come on, man.
Okay, so let's get into it then. So the upcoming college season, give us a little like peek into the old scheduling database there. What are some dates, or if it's more about prospects right now, who are some prospects that you're circling and be like, I got to get them slotted in when I'm filling out my schedule? Who's my top 5, top 10 that I've got to figure out when they're playing each other or when they're playing on TV that I can catch?
Well, so obviously to start off the year, November 9th, you have the Champions Classic, and that's Duke, that's Michigan State, that's Kentucky, and that's Kansas. So right there, you have 4 programs with a lot of well-known prospects that could be in those games. Paolo Banchero and A.J. Griffin for Duke. Obviously, you have Ty Washington, Damian Collins for Kentucky. And then, you have programs like Memphis that kind of sneak in there at different points. But Gonzaga, obviously, has Chet Holmgren, projected number 1 pick right now. That's going to be an interesting race as the season goes on for who's actually number 1. But Gonzaga and Duke actually play each other at the end of November, so that's also going to be a really interesting game. So that's like 3 games right off the top of my head, and I don't even have to go too far into looking at other schedules that are like, yeah, if anybody from the general public who's watching this who has an interest in seeing the young guys that are college basketball fans, like those are automatic games that you're tuning into for sure. And past that, other programs to look out for. Obviously, Kansas. Michigan's going to be really interesting. You have Caleb Houston playing for Michigan. He's going to be a really nice wing shooter type. Yeah.
You're in the back.
Memphis is going to be really interesting, especially with Jalen Duren and Imani Bates. That's going to be interesting. And then the G League Ignite team, Jaden Hardy headlining that G League Ignite team, but a few other interesting guys. I mean, Dyson Daniels, Michael Foster, Marjan Beauchamp. There's some really interesting guys on G League Ignite this year too that I'm really excited to see how all that works out. But yeah, I mean, just off of those programs alone, and then the other one I'll throw in there would probably be UCLA with Johnny Juzang and Jaime Jaquez coming back, and then you throw in Peyton Watson into the mix, who's like a sleeper top 10 pick right now. Really? So this college season's loaded. There's a lot of talent all over the place.
So wait, the early season games though, are you weighting those differently? Because sometimes you can. It's the only time you get to see them maybe play each other, so that's awesome because you can kind of see them, one to one versus other draft prospects. So it goes back to your earlier point about talent level, but then you're also, I don't know how to factor in sometimes, like it's the first or second game of the season, and some of these guys are 18 years old.
They're freshmen.
They're freshmen, yeah.
Their first, second game they've played in college. Maybe they haven't adjusted quite well enough yet to the speed of the game,
You have to evaluate as close to a full body of work as you possibly can. And that's actually a great question, a great point that you guys brought up. I responded to Mike Ribinov on Twitter the other day, who talked about, Pat Baldwin playing for Milwaukee. They're only going to have like 2 quote-unquote mainstream games all year, and then it's up to their conference schedule, which is not going to be up to the par of competition that you'd expect Pat Baldwin to be playing against if he went to a powerhouse program. So, I mean, if Pat Baldwin throws up a stinker in one of those 2 games, you're going to have a lot of mainstream media going, oh, well, these are the matchups that he got. Yeah, there's only 2 on the schedule, but he only played decently well in one of them. The other one was a complete no-show. So how are you going to try to prop him up when he's played against weaker competition, but when he got to play somebody similar to like how college football works, you get that one big game and you don't do well in that one big game and your stock just drops, it plummets. But is that really fair to the talent of somebody like a Pat Baldwin? That's going to be a really interesting question to answer. But I try to distribute how I weigh those games evenly over the course of an entire year, and the best is when you can see a prospect in one of these early games, like maybe somebody does pop off in one of the Champions Classic games, but how are they performing later in the season? What do they look like in their conference tournament? I try to use the NCAA tournament as a little bit of a benchmark. Usually my scouting's done by then. And certainly things can generally change, right? Like something in the tournament can happen that can make you have a second opinion, but those games shouldn't.
Saying last year.
Yeah, but that's the thing. Those games shouldn't be drastically changing your opinion, because Johnny Juzang looked great in some of those tournament games, but you go and pop on the film of some of his games throughout the year, and he wasn't looking as great creating his own shot. He wasn't efficient in some other games, and then you go watch him at the NBA Draft Combine when he actually has to go up against players who are his skill level or even better, and are dwarfing his athletic talent. And he's not looking so hot creating that shot, similar to he got hot in the NCAA tournament run, but that might not be how it looks in the NBA. So you have to be very careful not putting too much stock in one game, and definitely evaluating as much as you possibly can and taking everything into account.
So me and Aaron had a debate when we did our draft.
Ongoing debate. This hasn't been settled.
Yeah, it hasn't. So maybe you can help us. So, Suggs this year came from Gonzaga. My thing was, we were in the draft thing, is how do you know how good he really is? Because Gonzaga doesn't really play anybody all year. They have the one like you're talking about. They have the 1 or 2 or 3 games, but are you just basing that off the tournament then? Because, I mean, some of these teams he's playing during the season, it would be totally different if he was in the Big Ten playing tough teams every single night that are beating him up, right?
It cut out a little bit. Were you specifically talking about Jalen Suggs when you asked that question?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
So Jalen Suggs was one of the most unique guard prospects I've evaluated, because if you pick apart different layers to his game, obviously there are faults you can find, particularly on the offensive end when you talk about he's not your most traditional point guard. He's not, dropping pocket passes on the time regularly in different pick and roll sets. Gonzaga's not always running pro style stuff all the time. His handle's a little bit off, but he was one of those guys who stands out because of his intangibles, because of his leadership. And those are qualities that you can evaluate no matter who these guys are going up against. And when you're talking about who's worthy of being a top 5 pick in the NBA draft, somebody who you're hoping to be one of the faces of your franchise, if not the face of your franchise, what are the qualities in these players that you can sell besides just being exciting or being box office? It's also that level of toughness, right? That no-quit mentality, that hustle, that drive, and really what sold that for me. And this was, quote-unquote, one of their more high-profile games last year, but that game against West Virginia where he went down with that injury and you can see the tears coming down his face, not because he's in that much pain necessarily it's going to cause that, but because he's recognizing the magnitude of the situation. It's very early on in the year. His season, depending on how bad the injury is, it could be over, and you could see all of that emotion running out of him, but then you saw him on the sidelines wanting to walk it off and to allow him to get back into the game. And it's crazy how we come into a world now where some of these players, if they have any type of injury, they will literally sit out college games because they don't want to ruin anything for their professional career. And all Jalen Suggs could think about during that game, 10, 15 minutes go by, is I need to get back into this game and I need to help my team beat West Virginia. And that's literally all he cared about. And that level of toughness, that level of leadership, his desire to actually play the game of basketball and not just make a business decision, that really spoke to me. And that was the moment where I went, okay, Jalen Suggs, he might not be the number 1 pick, he might not be the number 2 pick, but as I said literally all year, GMs are going to lose a little bit of sleep at night because they didn't pick somebody like Jalen Suggs. Because if you need somebody who can transform a locker room and actually be a leader, that's the type of guy you go with. Not necessarily somebody like an Evan Mobley, for example, who all of his talent, he's going to help Cleveland because of his skill set, because of his uniqueness at his size with his blend of perimeter play. But he's not the same vocal leader. He's not the same... he doesn't exude the same level of toughness as somebody like a Jalen Suggs does. And Orlando, for as young of a team as they are, they were lacking some of that leadership. And that's why I think, yeah, the backcourt may be logjammed a little bit, but he's going to be a great fit there because that's what he brings from day one. So it's finding those things that it doesn't matter who they're playing against. It's finding those talents that you know you can evaluate regardless of what game it is and how those things are going to translate to the NBA level.
Rookie of the year, Jalen Suggs?
I'm going with Jalen Green for Rookie of the Year, but Jalen Green is my guy, and I had him in my top tier along with Cade Cunningham, but I think that Jalen Green, he has a great chance to be the best player from that draft class.
Okay, so one of the things I keep thinking about is how do you identify the guys who aren't the eye-popping stats guys? Because it seems like now with pretty much, every year a guy from Florida State, but it could be from another school like Patrick Ewing or Patrick Williams, and then who is it, Scotty Barnes this year. They don't have those stats that jump off the page, but they're going really high in the draft. So how are you looking past the traditional stats to identify guys who may end up, being high draft picks this coming year?
So when you guys had on the Google document Pat Williams, I thought that was a great example for that question, because when you look at somebody who didn't play a lot at Florida State, but when he got on the court, he was one of the best cutters in college basketball. That's a really valuable off-ball skill to have when you're coming into the NBA. You're probably going to be like a 4th or a 5th man in the lineup. You're expected to be able to move without the ball, communicate with your teammates, know where the ball's going, and then put yourself in a position to succeed and score when you're not able to dribble the air out of the ball. So that's a very valuable skill to have first and foremost to fit into an NBA team. But his athletic ability, his size, kind of being one of those versatile switchable forwards at 6'9", he can likely guard 1 through 4 in the NBA. If not right now, that's definitely coming within the next few years. And then he showed a little bit of that shot-making ability, not necessarily from 3 in college, but you saw some of that pull-up shot-making ability, that mid-range stuff that allowed people to make a little bit of like is he a baby Kawhi type of comparison. So you put that package together, the size, the length, the athleticism, the speed, the ability to fit into an offense playing off the ball, potential shooting ability. That's the type of package. You list off all of those things and you go, maybe he is worth a top 5 pick, even though he didn't play a lot in college basketball. It's about evaluating the skills and what they look like within the context of the game, not just looking at the raw numbers of the box score numbers of the minutes played and making your decisions based off of that. Scouting is all about watching the film first and foremost, and using the stats to kind of guide you towards what you should be watching. That's at least how I evaluate talent.
Do you have anybody this year that you're maybe is on your radar where you're like, ooh, that you might be that kind of guy? I know it's hard. It's hard before the season to even think about, right?
It is hard. It's definitely hard. But Caleb Houston could end up being one of those guys because, sure, if you flip on some of the high school film, there are examples of him pulling up and creating his own shot. But the majority of what he does is movement shooting and a lot of off-ball type movement, getting himself open for shots, not necessarily doing a lot of things with the ball in his hands. So you might look at his game and you might not think it's sexy by any means, and you could view him as like a late lottery type prospect. But if you go back and you watch the film and he is creating really good separation on the looks that he gets, if he's doing things off the ball that you know are going to translate to the NBA, especially when you factor in his size playing the wing position, plus his efficiency, that's the type of case where you can look and say, he didn't do a lot of stuff with his ball in his hands. How much of that is going to translate to the NBA? Do you only want to be drafting a movement shooter with like a top 10 pick? Or are you going to go the other way and say, yeah, but how many guys at his size and his age are able to put up points while maybe he's not averaging 16, 17 points per game, but the 10 to 12 that he is, he's able to fit within the context of that team, not disrupt the team, and how efficient he's doing those things. That's an argument that I could definitely see popping up somewhere.
So is that like what you were talking about earlier about Suggs? Like he has that, leadership and good team player mentality. Is that where you're getting at with that guy?
A little bit, but mainly just like when we're evaluating guys and you're looking for like a top 10 pick, right? You want those guys. You want to be star hunting as much as possible. And stars come in different shapes and sizes. They come in different varieties. Somebody could view a star, when you say that word, as somebody like Jalen Green, a legitimate isolation scorer, somebody who at the end of the game, you can get the ball to him and he's going to go get you a bucket by himself. He doesn't need anybody's help to get a bucket. Somebody like a Caleb Houston, for example, operates best off the ball. And it's an argument to be made like a Klay Thompson. Klay Thompson's not that I'm making a direct one-to-one comparison to those guys, but similar skill sets with the shooting aspect. Like Klay's not your most traditional star. He's not dribbling the air out of the basketball. He's not an isolation king, but he can also get like 30-something points in a quarter at some points in a game when you need it. So that it's evaluating that type of worth. What type of player do you foresee being worth your top 10 pick? What are you looking for specifically for your team? And in the case of Jalen Suggs, there's very few things that Jalen Suggs can't do on the basketball court to at least a good level, right? He might not have the most exceptional basketball skills right out of the gate, but the intangibles, the leadership, these are things that you can count on throughout the course of a game, and he's going to make everybody around him better. That's the most important thing, too. He can do what the team needs him to do, no matter what that is. If he needs to go out and guard the other team's best player, like a Drew Holiday, for example, Jalen Suggs is going to be able to do that. If you need him to go get a bucket, you saw, in the championship game, he was the only person on Gonzaga who seemed like he could get his bucket at any point. Like, you might not look at that to be his strongest suit in his rookie season in the NBA, but he proved in high-level games he can go do that. So it's about how does that player fit best with that team? Can you rely on him to do a few things out of the box outside of his quote-unquote normal role that he might play?
So on the opposite side of that, every year it seems like, well, maybe not every year, but there's been a lot of people that have been bust, right? That look really good in college. They're like Monk. He had everything that you thought you needed in college, right? And he just hasn't panned out yet in the NBA. He did a little bit better this year, but he's still nowhere near what people thought he was going to be, right? Like Jimmer Fredette. He was unbelievable in college. can shoot from anywhere, and it just didn't work out. Like, how do you, like, as an IU fan, we have Davis on our team. Like, how would you say, like, people think that he's a possible first-round pick next year, but to me, like, he can't shoot. So how does that translate into the NBA? You know, and it's like you said, you have to look at how they're going to fit into the NBA, right? He's super athletic, but it seems like now the NBA really isn't into them kind of players. You know what I mean? Like, you can get, like, the Dwight Howard for the minimum, right? Like, why are you going to take a guy like Jackson Davis in the draft when you can pick up, you know, Howard, or who is the other guy that just signed for not that much? I can't remember. But anyway, you get my point.
So Trace Jackson Davis is an interesting case because he's when you talk about how does he fit into the modern NBA, he's not the cleanest cut fit because he's pretty much a back to the basket post scorer in college. He's shown us no evidence that he's going to be able to stretch the floor to any semblance with some kind of jump shot. He's not a vertical big man. He's not a vertical lob spacer. He's kind of like a ground bound type big. And then defensively, yeah, he can block shots around the basket, but if you pull him out of the paint, the biggest debate right now about big men is how do they operate in pick and roll coverages when they get switched onto a guard or a wing who is a decent to great ball handler? How are they going to fare in those situations? If you get him on an island, is he just going to stay on that island? Can he come off the island a little bit, actually come up and guard somebody? Jackson Davis can't do that. So Jackson Davis is going to be your bench type big. I wouldn't envision him being a first round type talent, despite in college he's like a walking double for Indiana, right? He's a really, really, really good college player, but he's not the best fit in the pro game because he's going up against players who are much better athletes than he is. He's going up against coaching staffs and teams that will literally game plan or would know how to game plan around him if he played a significant role for a team, and they would be able to pick him apart. So obviously when we talk about guys like a Malik Monk, for example, Malik Monk isn't a bad athlete. He's a good to really good athlete for somebody his size, but he is on the smaller side, and all he's really brought to the table in the NBA is his ability to shoot the basketball. He hasn't been the best of finishers around the basket. He's not an exceptional playmaker. He is one of the smaller guys on the court, so you're not going to look to him to be a defensive stopper. So that's the other part of it, too. Are you just a one-dimensional player? Do you only have one skill or like 1.5 skills that you can bring to the table? And if you only have 1 to 1.5 skills that you can bring to the table, are you absolutely elite in doing so? Like Duncan Robinson, for example, yeah, he has size to his credit, right? Like he's a 6'7" wing. Really all he brings to the table is, you know, perimeter shooting, but he's making like 46% of his threes. So he is elite.
Like 11 game.
Exactly. He is elite at his skill, and Malik Monk hasn't been an elite shooter. So that's how you see somebody like that, you know, make a home on a bench. And yeah, he could be a valuable player at different points of the season for the Los Angeles Lakers if he gets some playing time, but that's why he wasn't going to carve out a significant role in Charlotte, because he's a one-dimensional smaller player, and you know that those aren't the kind of guys that NBA teams are looking for now, especially with the size, length, versatility. A lot of these wings, like everybody's looking for how many 6'6" through 6'9" players can we have in a lineup, not how many 6 foot 6'1" guys can we have in a lineup.
Okay, so how then, as you're filling out this schedule, how far back do you go with some of these guys? Are you identifying like a game during the year, and then if you kind of elevate them, are you looking then back at some of their past years' performances to counterbalance that? Because the thing that I keep thinking about is oftentimes some of the freshmen, like the guy from Stanford this year who went really high.
Zaire Williams, yep.
Zaire Williams, thank you. Elite in high school, had a rough year at Stanford, but somebody saw something along the line there where it elevated him into the lottery. So I just wonder, like, how are you balancing out what you're seeing currently with the possibility that it's not an ideal fit at their college, or the system is, you know, just those other factors?
I try and balance as much of it as possible. Zaire Williams was a really interesting case because he was viewed as this 3-level scorer in high school, this wing with tremendous size, grew all the way up to like 6'9.5", has the length to boot, is a pretty good athlete. But the problem with Zaire Williams, and the same thing happened with Brandon Boston as well, because both of them excelled at Sierra Canyon. But the problem is that they weren't able to finish around the basket much at all at the college level. And I think that really diminished their confidence. And in diminishing their confidence like that, it bled over to other parts of their game. They weren't as good of shooters. They weren't as comfortable and confident creating their own shot. And it really took them out of the game from a mental perspective. And when you evaluate somebody like Zaire Williams and you say, well, can he regain some of that confidence? Can he become that player that he was in high school? Can that work in the pros? Well, technically he can. I never rule out anybody developing into more than what they are, but it's going to take a lot of patience. It's going to take a lot of work. Like when the Memphis Grizzlies trade up and they draft somebody like Zaire Williams, where they did, a lot of people, Memphis fans in particular, don't want to hear that a top 10 pick may be playing the majority of the season in the G League. But my response to that would be, A, the G League isn't the D League. It's a much better environment for younger players than it used to be. So it's not a slight or an insult. At least I don't view it that way. And I know that Coach Thorpe has talked about that on True Hoop. He feels the same way. But fans don't necessarily want to hear that. They want to hear top 10 picks in the starting lineup right away, putting up big numbers. And that's not going to happen for Zaire Williams. He needs to add to his body. He needs to improve his strength base. And then he needs to get his confidence back finishing around the basket. And then that can bleed over into some of the other areas on the court as far as shooting. So it's looking at a full body of work, going back to the high school stuff, seeing what worked in high school, what didn't work in college, and then trying to determine how reasonable it is for that higher level outcome to still happen. And the Grizzlies definitely took a gamble on somebody like him. And Brandon Boston. Brandon Boston went 51st
this year. They might be following you this year. Draft deeper, Grizzlies fans, get on board now because you may be in the lottery again.
Well, funny enough, I'm not that far away from Philadelphia. I'm about an hour north of Philadelphia, okay. So I am like a big Sixers supporter. I was a Memphis Grizzlies fan first. I love those grit and grind teams, Zebo and Mike Conley, Marc Gasol. But yeah, they took a gamble at taking him number 10. Brandon Boston went 51st. And honestly, when we're talking about the value, I think I'd probably rather have Brandon Boston at 51 than Zaire Williams at number 10. So we'll see how it pans out. But I'm not always lower on guys that have the bad college year. I was really high on Cole Anthony when he came into the draft. Some people dropped him way down. I had him very high on my draft board, and that might not look so hot anymore now, especially after Summer League. I pretty much gave him a stern talking to on my podcast when I went through and did my older draft tiers. I'm like, Cole, like the fact that RJ Hampton got pulled out of Summer League before you did, like that's not looking good for you, man. And they drafted Jalen Suggs, like it's not looking good. But he was another guy too. He struggled in college. But you go back and watch the high school stuff, and then you break down the film and you look at what did work in college, and you still saw a lot of the 3-level scoring stuff. But it's about his efficiency, and the same thing was with Zaire Williams. Zaire Williams was able to pull up along the baseline, hit some nice jump shots here and there, and he'd hit a deep three-pointer or two for Stanford, but then you'd see him brick like 5 more shots in a row. So it's about consistency, efficiency. It's about having the confidence, being in the right headspace. And if he goes to a team that's willing to work with him and be patient with him, then that's fantastic. But if it's a team that's looking for instant results and you're taking a project knowing full well that he probably is a project, that's how some of these guys end up out of the NBA.
Well, we so appreciate your time today. Before we go, I just want to tell everyone to follow you. Is it Twitter the best place to follow you, or where's your primary social media where you like to post at?
Yeah, definitely follow me on Twitter at DraftDeeper. I'm not big on the Instagram or the Snapchat spaces, but I'm always checking my Twitter. You can always interact with me there. Definitely announcements about some team ups in the space coming soon. So if you're excited for my podcast to definitely come back for the 2022 season, if you like my work, then you're going to love a lot of the written stuff I plan on doing this year. So follow me on Twitter and stay tuned for some of those announcements.
Well, I want to finish up by talking a little name, image, likeness, because I think it's transforming the like, not just the draft space, but the college and pre-NBA space in so many interesting ways. I'd like to hear who your maybe top couple name, image, likeness guys. So maybe the guys that aren't at the top of your draft board, but the guys that have just that you're identifying that are going to be out there. Because I have a feeling that may start to influence NBA teams in interesting ways, because I think sometimes it's hard. You mentioned Memphis kind of going the other way with Zaire Williams, and I mean, I feel like their fan bases really get salty about that. You know, Scotty Barnes wasn't as sexy a pick as Suggs, and you know, I wonder where that balance is for some of these teams. I think that, you know, if you're a strong organization with like a solid core, but if, you know, some of these organizations like Minnesota right now, like, man, you better pick someone that your fan base is excited about, because you know, they're in the wilderness, you know.
Well, so as far as marketability is concerned, you need to be able to score the ball in bunches. You need to be an athlete. You need to be able to put on a show, you know, get that athletic play whenever you need it. And so Duke has two of those guys. Paolo Banchero and AJ Griffin are definitely two guys that I'd go with in that draft. Probably the name I'd be most excited about, the guy who I would want to market the most, would be Jaden Hardy, who's with the G League Ignite, because that kid is literally a walking bucket. He may be a better scorer in some aspects than Jalen Green even was. It would not shock. I think Jalen Green's going to be the better pro, but it would not shock me at all if Jaden Hardy has a better G League season this year than Jalen Green did last year. So I want to market him, obviously. Imani Bates was already a big name. If you were talking about marketability, you want the guy who was already on Sports Illustrated at 16. And he's definitely going to make a name. He's going to make a name for himself at Memphis. It's going to be an exciting team. And then over at Kentucky, Ty Washington is one of those point guards that plays with flash, plays with flair.
Great name.
Great name, speedster. Definitely going to be making some exciting things happen for that Kentucky team. And is there a more marketable spot in college basketball than Kentucky's point guard? When we look back, I don't think so.
No.
So. Yeah. Those are my five guys. If I'm looking at name, image, likeness, I'm putting together a team that I'd love to market. Those are my guys.
So is it Imani Bates? He's not in this coming draft?
He's not in this coming draft because he won't be eligible age-wise, but he'll be. He was reclassified. He'll be playing at Memphis this year, and then we'll see if he plays in Memphis for a second year. If he goes like the G League route, we'll see what he does for his second year. But similar to Kyra Lewis,
making,
that's what I was going to say. What kind of contract you get to go there?
How many endorsements can he pile up? Exactly.
A lot of dealerships in Memphis.
You think that'll? So I don't know if you've heard anything, but this is a question I'm going to be asking. I'm wondering how if there's a possibility that name, image, likeness could reshape the way that guys approach the draft too. So if they're making enough money, like Imani Bates, and let's say, you know, a team that he doesn't like gets the first pick, is it possible that he could, you know, I'm going to stay a third year? You know, I don't want to go to Sacramento, which is kind of the last. I don't want to go to Minnesota. Yeah, I don't know.
I don't want to go to Cleveland.
Maybe I don't want to Cleveland. Is there a possibility, do you think, at least for some of these guys, that it may reshape their decision to enter the draft?
No, I think these guys are still they're going to want to break into the pros as early as they possibly can, and that's why I don't think the straight out of high school route is necessarily done either. I still think there can be a change made there, but I will say it's going to be really interesting. Not that I'm just from a Philly guy and I only want to talk about Ben Simmons, because I really don't want to talk about Ben Simmons at this point.
Man,
but
let's get into that immediately.
For this conversation, it's pertinent because Ben Simmons still has 4 years left on a contract, and he may very well be forcing his way out of Philadelphia into another situation. And if he gets traded,
worse.
And you set that precedent that somebody pretty much with a full contract left can just move and go wherever the hell they want. What is that going to mean for Zion? I mean, Zion already apparently wants out of New Orleans. So if Ben Simmons gets traded, I mean, his agency group and his company that he keeps are going to look and say, oh, well, this guy got moved. So Zion, keep eating all that fast food, man. Keep not giving a crap. Keep not communicating with your team. Like, do whatever you can to get out of New Orleans, and then once you get in a better situation, we'll figure out how you actually treat yourself like a professional. We promise. We'll help you get on the right path for your future. It's crazy how we're moving completely into player empowerment, player over empowerment, possibly. Like, I'm all for mobility, like Colin Cowherd says all the time in his show. I'm all for mobility. I'm all for players having the choice of, where to play for. But there also comes a point where you need to be a professional. You need to honor the contract that you sign. And we're getting to a point where the contracts literally aren't even going to matter at some points. Like, the only thing that's going to matter on the contract is how much money are you getting paid in your game checks and how much of a bonus can you earn throughout the season. It's going to be, the dollars are going to be the only thing that matters about the contract. So it's crazy, and that's kind of the route that name, image, likeness is pushing things as well. I'm glad that the athletes can get paid, and that they can get paid up front and on the record, not collecting checks or bags of money inside cars or whatever the hell else that colleges were doing. Exactly. So I'm glad that it's very legalized and out there, but it's going to be really interesting to see how this keeps evolving over time and how it changes college athletics.
Yeah, is it legalized? It's a little weird right now.
There's just a lot of
unknowns.
Yeah,
because there is one of the you're reading about like the tax implications, and then international. It's different for international prospects too. That could be an area that it gets a little wonky because they have a different visa that they're working on, so they have to be careful. I was reading something about how they could get deported essentially if they work under their visa, because they can they can profit from just passive income, but they can't actually work on some different types of visas. So
overtime elite to me is the most interesting thing that's happened over the last however many months, because European countries already have basketball academies in place where these guys are going to these academies at 14, 15 years old, and they're treated as pros. They can sign on to these professional teams, lower league squads, and they could begin playing basketball at a higher level. And now it's Overtime Elite's going to start taking players out of high school, like sophomores, juniors in high school, and they're going to bring them in, and they're going to give them the academy life. They have teachers on campus, the whole 9 yards, and it's going to be really interesting to see how many players Overtime Elite keeps getting in the fold, what kind of players they attract. Are more Overtime Elites going to end up popping up all over the place before the NBA is finally able to get the straight out of high school approach? That rule back into place.
It's got to be, right? It's like Montverde, except you're getting paid, right?
That's exactly what it is. Exactly.
Yeah. Okay, two things I got. So did you guys hear the Zion thing about the story from the bubble? What happened? This is a great.
You mean David Griffin playing the piano for him?
Yes.
No, I did not hear that.
Yeah, tell the story. That was fantastic, unbelievable.
I don't know 100% all the specifics about the story, but there was disgruntlement between Zion and his camp and the Pelicans front office, and apparently Griffin brought Zion into a room and played the piano for him, or something like that.
He was singing to him or just playing?
Yeah, the whole night. Yeah.
Man, how do you connect with a 22-year-old
basketball
player?
You buy him a car or something.
You sit down at the piano and you bust out some Billy Joel, and off to the races. You guys are best friends. Okay, and then I gotta get your take on Ben Simmons. Is he going to be in camp this coming week? Is he going to be traded? Where's he going?
I've heard nothing.
Do you even want him?
You know what, man? I've been the biggest Ben Simmons fan since he came into the NBA. Because I decided to be a basketball player for a Halloween party one year, I ended up buying a second 76ers jersey in a different color so that I could match the right pair of shorts. I could have the whole uniform thing going on, but it led me to have two Ben Simmons jerseys, not just one. Man. Wow. Nobody's been a bigger supporter of Ben Simmons than I have, but at this point, I can't defend him anymore, man. I can't defend him. I've been yelling at my TV for the last 5 years to just be more aggressive, to when you have the chance to attack downhill. He can run past anybody that he wants. He's arguably the fastest player end to end with the ball in his hands in the NBA when you think about it. Like, yeah, there are some guards who might technically be a little faster, but when you factor in Ben's size and the length of his strides, he's probably the quickest player end to end, and he will literally just cross the half court line and he'll just stop. And he'll just wait for his team to come up. And I don't think that's always what the coaching staff wants. Like, he can beat the one or even two guys down the court. He can score. He can get into the paint in the half court literally whenever he wants. But he just doesn't. And that's been my biggest thing. It's not just the shooting. Everyone wants to harp on the shooting that he won't take a three-point shot. But if he wasn't afraid to get to the line, if he was much more willing to just drive and be aggressive, period, he could score 25, 26 points per game. And when you take like that 12 to 15 point difference in his scoring average in the playoffs and you tack that on to what the 76ers score was in some of those playoff games, they probably wouldn't have lost to Atlanta. And it's not fair for Ben Simmons to eat all of that and be the sole reason, the sole blame for why they lost to Atlanta in the playoffs. But I can tell you this, it sure wasn't Embiid's fault. And I was literally there for multiple of those games where Embiid handed them the game on a silver platter going into the fourth quarter. Like 19, 20-point leads going into the fourth quarter. Just take us home, guys. Ben, Tobias, just take us home. And they couldn't get it done. And it's like...
Jimmy.
Yeah, right. And why didn't Jimmy want to be there? Because of Ben Simmons, and now look who's going to be off the team, Ben Simmons. Yeah. So it's incredible.
So, in your circles, is the Simmons thing? Is he not? I mean, I'm sure he practices and stuff like that, but
practices on video at least.
I mean, how does a guy, of his, it's in the NBA, he can't shoot a jump shot. I mean. He has to be like, for what you do, like, is he one of the players now you look at and say, no, not everybody can shoot? Like, when you're drafting a player and they have every athletic ability, they have all this thing, but they haven't proved they can shoot a jump shot or three. If he practices enough, he'll get good at it. But then you have Ben Simmons, right? So, like, does that affect, like, future prospects and how they get drafted?
I haven't seen anything as bizarre like Ben Simmons at all. The closest thing was Markelle Fultz going to the Sixers, and he had an injury and then his shot breaks down, and it's amazing what happens to the Sixers. I mean, the Ben Simmons situation, Markelle Fultz, Zaire Smith almost dies because of a peanut allergy or like something like that. Like it's. Right. It's honestly it's incredible what's happened to the Philadelphia 76ers, and thankfully Zaire Smith I guess is okay in his personal life now, and other than injuries, Markelle Fultz, he was on the upwards in Orlando, may still end up being on the upwards, and Ben Simmons may thrive in another situation. It's crazy how all this seems to like just happen to the Philadelphia 76ers, and I don't know what they did to bring this curse upon them, but in scouting,
you know exactly what they did. It's called the process. They angered the basketball gods and brought that upon themselves.
Well, then what's Sam Presti doing? Then what kind of curse is Sam Presti going to impose on the Thunder for years to come?
He's bringing one upon himself. It's coming, yeah, for sure, for sure. We'll have to see. The seeds are being laid right now, but something's happening. If I was out Walker, I'd be getting off that team as soon as possible before I have a Sean Livingston type injury, God forbid.
So this is my last Ben Simmons question.
All right.
So, what value do you honestly think that they can get for him? Like player level that they could get back for him?
I've been screaming for how many months are we on now? That was in what, June? So what, July, August, September? So going on 4 months. I've been screaming for Ben and Danny Green, for CJ McCollum and Robert Covington. Just call it in, get it done. Because I think CJ is arguably the most... Now that Mike Conley got an all-star appearance, I think that the underrated Mike Conley for like 7-8 years can finally be put to rest a little bit. But now it's CJ McCollum's turn, being the most underrated player in the NBA. That guy is a walking 20 points per game scorer. I think last year he had over a 3-to-1 assist to turnover ratio, so I think he can actually come in, be a point guard for that team, run offense. He can be a second option. He'd be a really nice pairing with Joel Embiid and pick and roll, pick and pop, and obviously you can use him a similar way they were just using Seth Curry or somebody like a JJ Redick too. You can have the two-man game between him and Embiid. You can have McCollum work off dribble handoffs, etc. And then he can score in a variety of ways. And then you would bring back somebody like Covington too, who hasn't been an incredible role player for anybody else but Philly. He really hasn't been that great since he left Philly, ironically, but you bring him back, and I think that's really good value for Ben Simmons, who, let's not forget how good of a player Ben Simmons is either, and that's like the sad part.
No,
like he's not trash, and that's what everybody, I won't say everybody, but the general public who just want to bash him, they forget that he's an all-defensive type talent. He was like the third or fourth best player last year in terms of creating open three-point shots. So he's an elite passer, an elite defender. He can score when he has the mindset to score. I mean, he put up 42 points against the Utah Jazz when he played them like the second half of last year. So it's not like he can't score. He is an elite player. It's just I don't know what it is with him. I think Jackie McMullen's probably laid out the best theory that he just doesn't want to fail. And that's the reason why he's not more aggressive or why he doesn't want to shoot all these jump shots. If he's not doing it at a certain percentage or he's not doing it at a high enough level, then why bother to do it at all? He probably thinks that he's only going to hurt the team. Well, he would actually only help if he just took those shots and he made the defense more honest. It would open things up for everybody else. It would open things up for him to continue to pass the ball, which he is really good at doing. So I don't know what it is. It's a bizarre story, but I don't know where he ends up. I guess Minnesota's like apparently the clubhouse leader. I heard Denver come out of the woodwork. I have no idea what a Denver trade looks like, to be honest. That if Denver would give up Michael Porter Jr. in a Ben Simmons deal, to call it into the league office. But I don't. Wow. I can't see them doing something like that. I can't see them doing something like that. Sacramento's.
As a Sixers fan, you'd be happy for that trade?
I mean, Michael Porter's the highest upside player that's been at this point, other than if the Kings would give up De'Aaron Fox either. Those are probably the two.
Have you seen him?
No,
shoot?
he's good. I mean, Ben Simmons. I mean, I like to give a hard time about him, but he is an All NBA type player.
Yeah.
So I mean, it's like you said, like he brings a lot to the table, and wasn't Porter or is it Michael Porter?
Yeah.
Didn't he have back problems or something? So you're taking on a chance maybe that creeps back up. You know, because how old's Ben Simmons? Like
it's more
26.
Yeah, Ben's 25,
it's more an age thing.
25. Yeah. I mean, that's a pretty young player still.
Yeah, but I mean, Michael Porter's like 22, and it's like the flip side of CJ. CJ is what? He's in his 30s, right?
He's late 20s, early 30s. Michael Porter Jr., for how young he has one of the best synergy profiles I looked at last year in terms of his scoring. He can do literally anything on the offensive end of the floor. He got better at defense. He's one of the best offensive rebounders for somebody in his position. Like that's the highest upside I think that they could get back in a Ben Simmons trade. If I was Denver, I don't know if I'd do that. Because especially with Jamal Murray being out, if Ben Simmons isn't going to put a lot of points on the table, it's Jokic, it's Gordon who can be iffy shooting the basketball. If Ben Simmons isn't going to shoot, like you lose somebody like Michael Porter. So I don't know if they do that, but it looks like Minnesota, Denver, Sacramento, or Portland are the most likely destinations.
Because they might be that. If they like him enough, that could be an interesting one just because they could be punting on the season a little bit anyways without, Murray maybe out the whole year. So maybe you're like, you know what, let's get him. Then when Murray gets back the following year, we got our squad. We got defense. We got the MVP for passing and offense. Then we got Murray for offense.
And Cleveland. I've warmed up to the Cleveland package too of like Colin Sexton, Isaac Okoro, multiple firsts. I've warmed up to that package, but
I just want to see Simmons get sent to Cleveland.
That's what everybody says. Everybody wants to see LeBron Jr. get sent to the Cavs, but
he would be. The drama would be endless. Then he'd be. How long before he could ask out again?
He's had it good in Philadelphia. That fan base. I won't necessarily say the word "we," but the fan base was more than happy to support him for years, despite a lot of this stuff really being a problem his entire career there. So he's going to have a tough time going to another fan base or going to another situation where he's not set up to be in the playoffs every single year. And he's got to be in a situation like a Minnesota or a Sacramento where you're losing all the time. And yeah, you're in a different place. Maybe the fans aren't, beating you down and getting down your throat for the same things that a Philly fan would do. But are you going to like losing? You're going to get paid a lot of money, but are you going to like being there just losing all the time? What's that going to do? So I don't know. I don't know what matters to Ben Simmons. If he just wants to be a celebrity, then maybe he finds a way to get that trade forced to Sacramento or somewhere like that. He can live out in California, date his celebrity models, whatever he wants to do, spend his money. If that's all that matters to him, and there's not necessarily anything wrong with that. I wish I could be making a lot of money and living in California and doing all those fun things. But if he cares about winning basketball games, he's been in a great situation in Philadelphia, and I don't know, other than Denver, I don't know where else he's going to find that level of success.
Going to be interesting. Well, man, I appreciate your time this evening. Can't wait to read the stuff on the upcoming season. We're going to definitely message out to everybody to follow you at Draft Deeper and the podcast too. So looking forward to catching you too as a guest on other people. I'm sure Chad will have you back on, and who knows, maybe David. Have you been on Thorpe's yet?
I have not been on True. If I got asked to be on True Hoop with him and Henry Abbott, I'd fall over in my chair. But
start messaging him. You'd be great on there.
Oh yeah,
absolutely. Thank you guys so much for the support and having me on. I appreciate being able to talk to and be on anybody's show. It's great for both brands, and it's just awesome getting to know more people in the space.
Love it, man. All right, thanks, man. That was